Now that Marcus is gone, don't be dramatic. Pack your bags and learn to stand on your own 2 feet. My daughter-in-law Danielle said to me the night after we buried my son, and the way she said it, calm, almost bored, hurt more than the words themselves. The house still smelled faintly of the catered food neighbors had dropped off, aluminum trays stacked on the kitchen counter beside the slow cooker I hadn't had the strength to wash. Marcus's favorite leather jacket was draped over the back of a dining chair, exactly where he had left it a week before his heart gave out on that quiet Tuesday morning. I was still wearing black. I hadn't even taken off the small silver cross necklace I wore to the service. I remember looking at Danielle across the table, noticing how perfectly composed she seemed, her nails freshly done, her voice steady. My grandson Jaden sat in the living room, the television playing softly, unaware that his grandmother's place in his life was being quietly rearranged like furniture no one wanted anymore. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and nodded once. At 68 years old, after raising Marcus by myself in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, after working double shifts as a nurse's aide for nearly 20 years so he could attend a good college, I had learned that silence can be more powerful than shouting. The dining room felt too large, too bright under the chandelier Marcus installed for me last Christmas. "Mom, it's just temporary," he had said back then, tightening the last screw, smiling down at me from the ladder. He always called me Mom with that soft tone, the one that carried gratitude. That night after the funeral, Danielle's tone carried something else, impatience, maybe even relief. She spoke about utility bills, about how the mortgage was complicated now, about how she needed space to figure things out. Her words floated around me like paperwork I hadn't signed. I listened. I watched. I noticed how she avoided looking directly at Marcus's framed photo on the mantel. Grief sat heavy in my chest, but beneath it something colder began to settle. I thought about the hospital room, about holding Marcus's hand while machines hummed quietly in the background. He had squeezed my fingers and whispered, "You'll be okay, Mom." I made sure of that. At the time, I believed he was trying to comfort me in the only way he could. Sitting at that dining table, hearing Danielle suggest I learn to stand on my own 2 feet, I realized those words might have meant more. The house I helped him purchase 5 years ago, my savings covering the down payment, suddenly felt unfamiliar. I could hear the dishwasher running, the steady rhythm of water against metal racks, as if life inside these walls had already moved on. Danielle stood and began clearing plates, efficient, detached. 2 weeks should be enough time, she added over her shoulder. 2 weeks to box up photographs, to wrap china I had passed down from my own mother, to fold the quilt Marcus gave me on my 65th birthday. I rose slowly from my chair and walked upstairs to the guest room where I had been staying since the hospital. The hallway carpet felt softer than I remembered. In Jaden's room, I paused at the door, watching him sleep, one arm thrown above his head, just like Marcus used to. My reflection in the mirror at the end of the hall looked older than 68. It looked tired, but it did not look defeated. I closed the guest room door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. Danielle believed grief had weakened me. She believed that without my son, I had no footing left. What she did not understand was that I had stood alone before. I had stood alone when Marcus was 3 and his father left. I had stood alone through layoffs, through rent increases, through winters when the heat barely worked, and I wrapped us both in blankets to stay warm. I would pack my bags if that was what needed to be done, but I would not leave empty-handed, and I would not leave unaware. I did not sleep much that night. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the walls understood something had shifted. Around 3 in the morning, I walked downstairs and stood in the kitchen, looking at the refrigerator covered in school drawings and appointment reminders written in Marcus's handwriting. His script was steady and neat, each letter carefully formed. I traced one note with my fingertip, the ink slightly raised against the paper, and I felt the weight of absence press down on me again. Grief is a strange thing. It does not shout all the time. Sometimes it just sits beside you like an old friend who refuses to leave. By sunrise, I had brewed a pot of coffee and folded 2 cardboard boxes I found in the garage. The tape made a sharp tearing sound that echoed more loudly than it should have. Danielle came downstairs dressed for work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She looked surprised to see me already awake. "I thought you might still be resting," she said, pouring herself a cup without meeting my eyes. I told her I had always been an early riser. That much was true. For decades, I had woken before 5 in the morning to catch the bus across town, working 12-hour shifts that left my feet aching and my back stiff. Waking early was not new. What was new was packing my life into boxes inside the home I helped build. I began with the guest room. I folded my clothes carefully, stacking sweaters Marcus had bought me over the years. One was navy blue, the color he said made me look younger. I paused for a moment, pressing it to my chest, then placed it inside the box. I did not cry. I had cried enough in the hospital hallway while doctors spoke in measured tones about percentages and possibilities. Now my tears felt spent. Around mid-morning, I heard Danielle on the phone in the living room. Her voice was softer than usual, almost urgent. She mentioned insurance, paperwork, and something about refinancing. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough to understand that decisions were being made quickly. Too quickly for someone who had lost a husband only days ago. I moved quietly down the stairs and glanced at the framed family portrait on the wall. It had been taken last summer in the backyard, sunlight catching in Marcus's hair, while Jaden laughed at something off camera. Danielle stood beside him, smiling brightly. I wondered when that brightness had turned into calculation. By noon the first box was sealed. I carried it to the foyer and set it near the front door. It was not heavy. Years ago, I had learned to travel light, to keep only what truly mattered. Still, each object I touched felt like a thread being cut. When Jaden came home from school, he ran straight into my arms. "Grandma, are you moving?" he asked, his small hands gripping my waist. Children sense change before adults admit it. I knelt down and told him that sometimes grown-ups need to rearrange things, but that I would always be just a phone call away. His eyes searched my face for reassurance. I smiled for him, steady and warm. Danielle watched from the kitchen doorway, her expression unreadable. That afternoon I stepped onto the back porch where Marcus had once grilled on Sunday evenings. The air was cool, the sky pale and open above the fenced yard. I remembered him standing there in a faded apron, laughing as smoke curled into the air. "This is your house too, Mom," he had told me the day they moved in. I believed him then. I believed that family meant permanence. Standing there alone, I understood something different. A house can belong to you on paper. A home belongs to you only if you are welcome inside it. And I was beginning to see that my welcome had expired long before the funeral. The next morning, I drove to the bank alone. I did not tell Danielle where I was going, and she did not ask. The branch sat 12 miles away in a quiet strip mall between a pharmacy and a small bakery that Marcus used to love. I remember him bringing home warm peach cobbler on Sunday afternoons, setting it on my kitchen counter like a peace offering after a long week. As I walked into the bank, the automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the air inside felt cool and controlled, nothing like the heaviness that had settled over the house. I asked to speak with someone about the joint account Marcus, and I shared. The young teller smiled politely and led me to a glass office in the corner. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. I have learned that patience unsettles people more than anger. When the account manager pulled up the records, I watched her expression change almost imperceptibly. Large transfers had been made 2 days before Marcus passed away. Not after. Before. The numbers on the screen did not shout, but they spoke clearly enough. Funds had been moved into a separate account that did not carry my name. I felt my spine straighten against the chair. I asked for printed statements. My voice did not tremble. The manager handed them to me with a careful look, as if she understood that grief can sit quietly beside suspicion. As I stepped outside, sunlight bounced off the windshield of my car. I remained seated behind the steering wheel for several minutes, reading every line. Marcus had always been transparent with me about money. He would call and explain investments, insurance policies, retirement contributions. He used to say, "You earned this security, Mom. I am just organizing it." The timing of those transfers did not feel like organization. It felt like preparation. I drove back to the house slowly, the radio off, my thoughts steady and deliberate. When I pulled into the driveway, Danielle's car was already there. Through the living room window, I could see her pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. She stopped when she noticed me. That evening at dinner, she spoke about meeting with a financial advisor. She mentioned consolidating assets, simplifying accounts, protecting Jaden's future. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. I nodded, asking small questions, watching how quickly she answered them. Too quickly. After she went upstairs, I opened the desk drawer in the study where Marcus kept important documents. The folder labeled estate planning was gone. In its place sat a stack of outdated warranty papers and instruction manuals. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. This was not panic rising in me. It was clarity. Pieces were moving, and they had been moving before the funeral flowers even wilted. I thought back to the hospital room again, to the way Marcus had squeezed my hand and said I would be okay. He had looked certain enough that I began to wonder if he had anticipated something I had not. I returned to the guest room and placed the bank statements neatly inside my purse. I did not confront Danielle that night. There would be time for conversations. There would be time for truth. For now, I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what had been arranged in the shadows while I was busy praying beside my son's hospital bed. And for the first time since I began packing, I felt something shift inside me. Grief was still there, heavy and constant. But beneath it, resolve was taking root, quiet and unshakable. That night, I did not turn on the television or the lights in the guest room. I sat by the window and let the street lamp outside cast a faint glow across the carpet, and I allowed my mind to travel backward instead of forward. When Marcus was 5 years old, he used to sit at the small kitchen table in our old apartment with his tongue pressed against his bottom lip while he practiced writing his name. The table wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, and I had folded cardboard underneath it to keep it steady. We did not have much, but we had stability. I worked 60 hours a week back then, sometimes more, leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. Yet every night, I made sure his homework was finished and his clothes were laid out for the next morning. He used to look up at me with those serious eyes and say, "Mom, when I grow up, I am going to take care of you." I never asked him to. I never expected repayment. But he remembered. Years later, when he landed his first real job with benefits and a retirement plan, he took me out to dinner at a restaurant that overlooked Lake Michigan. The check was more than I would have spent on groceries in a week, and he insisted on paying. "This is just the beginning," he told me, smiling across the table. That same steady confidence had followed him into adulthood. He read every contract carefully. He asked questions. He did not move money without understanding where it was going. That is why the transfers I saw at the bank did not sit right in my spirit. Marcus was cautious. He believed in planning. He believed in protecting the people he loved. I thought about the day he asked me to contribute to the down payment on this house. He had spread the paperwork across his dining room table and walked me through every page. "Your name will be connected to this foundation," he said, tapping the document with his finger. "You helped build everything that brought me here." I trusted him because he had earned that trust over decades of consistency. Danielle had been part of our lives for 12 years. I welcomed her from the beginning. I hosted Sunday dinners. I watched Jaden when they traveled. I defended her when relatives questioned her spending habits or her tendency to avoid family gatherings. I believed unity required patience. But patience is not the same as blindness. In the months before Marcus passed, I noticed small changes. Danielle began handling more of the bills alone. She insisted on private conversations with financial advisors. She encouraged Marcus to update certain documents, saying it was practical and modern. At the time, I admired her initiative. Now those memories replayed differently, like scenes viewed from another angle. As I sat in the dim room, I realized something important. Marcus would not have moved money quietly to cut me out. That was not his character. If adjustments had been made, they were meant to secure something, not to erase someone. I rose from the chair and opened my suitcase, smoothing my hand across the inside lining. I was not just packing clothes. I was gathering evidence of a life built with intention. Marcus trusted me with more than memories. He trusted me with his legacy. And legacies are not transferred without careful design. Whatever Danielle believed she had arranged, she underestimated one thing. She underestimated how well I knew my own son. The following afternoon, I made a call I had not expected to make so soon. I stepped outside onto the driveway, feeling the cool concrete beneath my shoes, and dialed the number of Harold Bennett, the attorney who had helped Marcus draft his estate documents 3 years earlier. I still remembered the afternoon Marcus introduced us in his office downtown, sunlight pouring through tall windows while he explained that planning ahead was not pessimistic, it was responsible. When Harold answered, his voice carried the calm steadiness of a man who had delivered difficult news before. I told him who I was. There was a pause, then recognition. He said he had been meaning to reach out, but did not want to intrude during a time of mourning. I told him mourning was no longer my only concern. We agreed to meet the next morning. I did not mention the bank transfers over the phone. Some conversations deserve to happen face to face. That evening, Danielle informed me that she had scheduled an appointment to discuss restructuring the mortgage. She spoke as though the future had already been decided. I listened carefully, noticing how she framed every plan around efficiency and independence. Not once did she mention Marcus's previous discussions about long-term protection or shared ownership. After dinner, I returned to the guest room and reviewed the printed statements again, studying dates and amounts. The transfers had occurred 48 hours before Marcus was admitted to the hospital. I remembered those days clearly. Danielle had insisted on handling logistics while I stayed with Marcus. She said she wanted me to focus on being his mother, not worrying about bills. At the time, I appreciated her thoughtfulness. Now that memory felt like a calculated kindness. The next morning, I drove into the city, the skyline rising ahead of me in familiar gray lines. Harold's office was on the 15th floor of a building overlooking the river. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, my reflection in the mirrored walls composed and deliberate. When I sat across from him, I placed the bank statements on his desk without commentary. He adjusted his glasses and examined them in silence. After several minutes, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He explained that Marcus had updated certain documents 6 months earlier, including a trust designed to protect both me and Jaden. My name, he confirmed, was not removed from foundational ownership. In fact, Marcus had structured portions of his assets so that changes required dual acknowledgement. The transfers I showed him were significant, but they did not override the framework already in place. A slow warmth spread through my chest. Not triumph. Not yet. But certainty. Marcus had not abandoned me. He had prepared. Harold continued speaking, outlining steps that could be taken if assets were being redirected improperly. His tone remained professional, never accusatory. I appreciated that. I have no taste for chaos. I prefer clarity. When I left the office, the wind off the river tugged gently at my coat. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting the truth settle into me. Danielle believed she was moving pieces on a board only she could see. What she did not realize was that the board had been designed long before she began rearranging it. I returned to the house that afternoon quieter than before, not because I was uncertain, but because I understood more than I had yesterday. Grief still accompanied me, steady and undeniable. But now it walked beside resolve. And resolve does not rush. It waits for the right moment to stand. The shift in me was subtle, but it was real. I stopped moving like a woman being pushed out and started moving like a woman preparing her next step. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with Danielle across from me. The same polished wood surface where Marcus once spread out spreadsheets and insurance brochures. She spoke about timelines again, about how 2 weeks would give me enough time to find a smaller place, something manageable, something appropriate. I watched the way she folded her hands, the way she avoided saying the word temporary. I nodded slowly and told her I understood. She seemed relieved by my calmness. Relief can make people careless. Over the next few days, I continued packing at an unhurried pace. I labeled each box neatly with a black marker. Bedroom, kitchen items, personal files. Danielle passed by me in the hallway more than once without making eye contact. I could feel her watching, waiting for resistance that never came. Meanwhile, Harold prepared the necessary documents. He explained that Marcus had structured the trust so that any attempt to redirect substantial assets without proper authorization would trigger a formal review. It was not dramatic. It was procedural, and procedure is powerful when followed carefully. On Thursday afternoon, a certified envelope arrived addressed to Danielle. I happened to be standing near the front door when the mail carrier handed it over. I accepted it and placed it on the entry table. Danielle opened it in the kitchen while I washed a single plate in the sink. The sound of paper unfolding was louder than the running water. There was a long silence. Then another page turned. I did not look at her immediately. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel and set it down. When I finally turned around, her expression had changed. Not angry, not yet, but unsettled. She asked if I knew anything about a review of asset transfers connected to the trust. I answered honestly. I said that Marcus had always believed in clarity, and that clarity sometimes requires verification. My voice remained even. I did not accuse her. I did not raise a single question beyond what was already written in the letter. She read it again, this time more carefully. The document outlined the requirement for transparency, the need to account for recent movements of funds, and the temporary restriction placed on certain transactions until the review concluded. It was written in calm legal language, free of emotion. That is what made it effective. Danielle placed the papers on the counter and crossed her arms. For a brief moment, our eyes met fully. I saw calculation there. Yes, but also surprise. She had expected me to leave quietly, boxes in hand, dignity diminished. She had not expected a structured response. That night she made several phone calls behind the closed door of the bedroom she once shared with my son. I did not press my ear to the wall. I did not need to. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. I returned to the guest room and continued folding clothes, smoothing each sleeve with deliberate care. I was not fighting for money. I was standing for intention. Marcus had built safeguards not out of suspicion, but out of responsibility. And I was honoring that responsibility by refusing to disappear. When I turned off the lamp beside my bed, I felt something I had not felt since before the funeral. Not peace. Not yet. But balance. The ground beneath me no longer felt uncertain. It felt steady again. By the end of the week, the air inside the house felt different. It was no longer heavy with quiet grief alone. It carried tension, thin and sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks. Danielle moved through the rooms with controlled precision, her phone rarely leaving her hand. I could sense that the letter from Harold had unsettled more than just her plans. It had interrupted her certainty. I continued my routine without deviation. Each morning I rose before sunrise, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a small notebook beside me. I began writing down dates, conversations, observations. Not out of suspicion alone, but out of discipline. Marcus had taught me that preparation is not paranoia. It is protection. On Saturday afternoon, Danielle approached me while I was sorting through a box of photo albums. Her voice was measured, but there was an edge beneath it. She asked why I had involved an attorney. I told her I had not involved anyone. I had simply responded to information that required clarification. She reminded me that the house was in her name as well, that she was responsible for maintaining stability for Jaden. I agreed with her. Stability is important for a child. That is precisely why transparency matters. My tone remained steady. I did not accuse her of anything. I did not mention the transfers directly. I simply said that Marcus believed in shared responsibility, and I intended to honor that belief. She studied my face as though searching for weakness. She did not find it. Later that evening, Jaden came into the guest room holding a small framed photograph of him and Marcus at a baseball game last summer. He asked if he could keep it in his room. I told him it already belonged to him. As he walked away, I felt a quiet clarity settle deeper within me. This was never about ownership in the shallow sense. It was about legacy, about ensuring that what Marcus built could not be quietly redirected without acknowledgement. The following Monday, Harold called to inform me that the review process had officially begun. Temporary restrictions had been placed on additional asset movements until documentation was provided. I thanked him and ended the call. I did not share this update with Danielle immediately. Information, like emotion, does not need to be displayed to be effective. That afternoon she received another notice requesting specific financial records. I watched from the dining room as she opened it. This time there was no attempt to conceal her reaction. Her shoulders stiffened. She exhaled slowly, then folded the paper with deliberate care. When she finally spoke to me, her voice carried frustration beneath its calm surface. She said this process was unnecessary and invasive. I replied that clarity protects everyone involved, especially Jaden. I emphasized his name gently, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. The truth is simple. When you move with patience, you force others to reveal their haste. Danielle had expected grief to make me compliant. Instead, it made me observant. She had expected silence to mean surrender. Instead, it meant calculation. That night, as I placed another sealed box near the front door, I realized something important. I was no longer packing because I was being pushed out. I was packing because I was preparing for transition on my own terms. There is a difference between leaving defeated and leaving informed. I had gathered my documents. I had secured legal clarity. And I had reclaimed something even more valuable than property. I had reclaimed my footing. The house remained quiet as I turned off the lights. But beneath that quiet, the balance of power had shifted, and Danielle knew it. The next notice arrived on a gray Wednesday morning, delivered by courier instead of regular mail. I was in the living room dusting the bookshelf when the doorbell rang. Danielle answered it, and I watched from a distance as she signed for the envelope. The courier offered a polite nod and left without conversation. Danielle stood there for a moment, staring at the return address. Her posture was stiff, shoulders drawn tight. She opened it slowly at the kitchen counter, sliding her finger beneath the seal with deliberate care. I could hear the faint rustle of thick legal paper. This document was longer than the others. As her eyes moved across the page, color drained from her face in a way that could not be hidden by composure. The letter outlined the results of the preliminary review. It confirmed that certain transfers required documented consent from all parties listed in the trust structure. It also stated that until clarification was provided, access to a significant portion of the redirected funds would remain restricted. There were paragraphs detailing oversight protections Marcus had put into place specifically to prevent unilateral decisions during periods of medical vulnerability. I did not need to see the words to understand their weight. Danielle lowered herself into a chair as if her knees had briefly weakened. She asked me, in a voice that was no longer steady, whether I had known about these provisions. I answered honestly. I knew Marcus believed in layered safeguards. I did not know the exact timing of his final revisions. She pressed her lips together and stared at the table. For the first time since the funeral, she did not speak about timelines or independence. Instead, she asked what I intended to do. The question was revealing. It suggested she now understood that I had options. I folded my hands in front of me and said that my intention had always been simple. I wanted transparency. I wanted respect for the framework Marcus established. Nothing more. Nothing less. The silence that followed was different from previous silences. It was not dismissive. It was calculating, but cautious. Later that afternoon, Harold called to confirm that further documentation had been requested and that a formal accounting process would begin within 10 business days. He explained that if discrepancies remained unresolved, corrective measures could be implemented automatically under the trust guidelines. His tone remained calm and precise. I thanked him and ended the call. When I returned to the kitchen, Danielle was seated at the table with the documents spread out before her. She looked up at me, and for a brief moment I saw not hostility, but realization. She had assumed that control belonged to whoever acted first. She had not considered that control can also belong to whoever prepares best. That evening, Jaden asked if I would still be moving out. I told him that sometimes plans change when new information comes to light. His small face brightened slightly, though he did not fully understand the mechanics behind the shift. Children do not need to understand financial structures. They need stability. As I tucked him into bed, I felt a quiet gratitude toward Marcus. Even in his absence, he had thought ahead. He had anticipated the possibility that emotions and money might collide. He had designed a structure that required fairness. When I walked back downstairs, Danielle was gathering the documents into a neat stack. The confidence she once carried had softened into uncertainty. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply stood steady in the center of the room that once felt like it was slipping away from me. The ground beneath my feet no longer felt temporary. It felt anchored by intention, by planning, by foresight that extended beyond grief. And for the first time since I began packing, I stopped taping boxes. The formal accounting process concluded on a quiet Friday afternoon. Harold called just after 2 o'clock, his voice steady as ever. He explained that the documentation review confirmed what the trust had already implied. The core assets, including the house and designated accounts, remained protected under the structure Marcus established. Any significant transfer required documented mutual acknowledgement. Since that acknowledgement had not been properly executed, corrective adjustments would restore the balance. There would be no dramatic courtroom scene, no raised voices, no public spectacle, just signatures, compliance, and the quiet force of preparation. When I ended the call, I stood in the center of the living room and let the information settle into the walls around me. This house, built with my savings and my son's discipline, was not something that could be quietly reassigned. Danielle was at the dining table reviewing yet another letter when I informed her that the review had concluded. She listened without interrupting. The confidence that once sharpened her posture had softened into something more reflective. She asked what this meant for living arrangements. I answered simply. It meant stability. It meant that no one would be pushed out under assumptions. It meant that Marcus's intentions would stand. She nodded slowly, absorbing the finality in my tone. There was no apology offered, and I did not request one. Apologies can be spoken without understanding. I preferred comprehension. Over the next week, the atmosphere inside the house shifted again, this time toward cautious coexistence. Financial structures were clarified. Access points were properly documented. Harold ensured that updated copies of every relevant paper were delivered to both of us. Transparency replaced assumption. I resumed unpacking some of the boxes I had sealed days earlier. Not all of them. Just enough to signal that my presence was not temporary unless I chose it to be. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the backyard fence, I stood on the porch where Marcus once grilled on summer Sundays. Jaden ran across the grass chasing a soccer ball, his laughter cutting through the quiet air. Danielle stepped outside and stood a few feet away from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said that she had underestimated how much planning Marcus had done. I told her that he believed responsibility did not end with good intentions. It required structure. She looked toward Jaden and nodded. In that nod was an understanding that control and care are not the same thing. I did not celebrate. I did not claim victory. This was never about winning against her. It was about honoring my son's foresight and protecting the foundation he built for his child and for me. In the weeks that followed, I decided to purchase a modest condominium 15 miles away, close enough to remain present in Jaden's life, but independent enough to maintain my own space. The trust allowed for that choice without pressure. When I finally packed my last suitcase, it was not because I had been told to leave. It was because I was choosing my next chapter. On my final evening in the house, I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, remembering Marcus's laughter echoing down the hallway. Grief still lived in my chest. It always would, but it no longer defined my footing. Danielle stood by the front door as I carried my suitcase outside. There were no harsh words this time, only a quiet acknowledgement that things had unfolded differently than she expected. I placed my suitcase in the trunk, closed it gently, and looked back at the house one last time. I had not raised my voice. I had not fought with anger. I had simply stood still while the structure my son built did its work. And that was enough.